The office was quiet after hours, the usual buzz of ringing phones, printers, and voices replaced by a stillness that settled into the corners of every room. Sarah leaned back in her chair, the dim light from her computer screen casting a soft glow over her tired features. It had been a long week, and even though it was Friday night, there was still so much left to do. She wasn't surprised when she heard the sound of heels clicking against the tile floor. Her boss, Evelyn, had a habit of working late, often staying hours after everyone else had gone home. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared dedication to their work, but it was more than that. It was a connection Sarah couldn't quite explain. Evelyn stopped just outside the door, leaning against the frame. "You're still here," she said, her voice soft but carrying that authoritative tone that Sarah had grown to respect. "Yeah, just finishing up," Sarah replied, glancing up from her computer. "You know how it is." Evelyn's eyes, sharp and discerning, took her in for a moment longer than usual. Sarah had always admired her boss's poise, tall, confident, with an effortless elegance that seemed to demand attention without trying. Even now, in the soft light, Evelyn looked every bit as composed as she did during the day, though her hair was slightly out of place, and there was a faint hint of exhaustion behind her smile. "I do," Evelyn said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "But you should really go home, Sarah. It's late." "I'll leave soon," Sarah assured her, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. There was something about being in the office after everyone else had left that gave her a strange sense of peace. Or maybe it was the fact that Evelyn was here too. Evelyn moved around the desk, her movements graceful, as always, until she was standing behind Sarah's chair, looking down at the screen over her shoulder. Sarah could feel the faint warmth of her presence, the closeness of her body, and it sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. "What are you working on?" Evelyn asked, her voice lower now, almost intimate. "Just going over the data from the last campaign," Sarah replied, trying to focus on the screen, though it was becoming increasingly difficult with Evelyn standing so close. "I want to make sure everything's ready for Monday." Evelyn leaned in slightly, her breath warm against Sarah's neck as she peered at the screen. "You're too dedicated," she said softly, and there was something in her tone that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "I learned from the best," Sarah said, half joking, but the words felt heavier in the air between them. Evelyn straightened, stepping back just enough for Sarah to catch her breath. "You know," Evelyn said after a moment, moving to sit on the edge of the desk, her eyes locked on Sarah's. "Sometimes I wonder if you ever take a break." Sarah looked up at her, caught off guard by the comment. "I take breaks." "Not enough," Evelyn replied, her voice soft but firm. "You're always here late, always the last to leave. It's admirable, but you should know when to switch off, Sarah." Sarah opened her mouth to reply, but the words got stuck in her throat. There was something about the way Evelyn was looking at her, something different, something that made her pulse quicken. She'd always admired Evelyn, respected her, even been a little intimidated by her. But this felt different. "I suppose you could say the same about yourself," Sarah said finally, her voice a little steadier than she felt. Evelyn smiled, a small knowing smile. "Touché." She paused, letting the silence stretch between them before she spoke again. "It's different for me, though. I have my reasons." "Don't we all?" Sarah said quietly, though she wasn't sure what she meant by it. The silence returned, heavier this time, charged with something Sarah couldn't quite name. She looked up at Evelyn, her eyes searching her boss's face for some clue as to what was happening, what had shifted between them in the last few minutes. Evelyn's gaze was unwavering, intense, and Sarah felt herself being drawn into it, her breath catching in her throat as the air in the room seemed to thicken. She'd never seen her boss like this before, so open, vulnerable even. "I didn't mean to keep you," Evelyn said after what felt like an eternity, her voice softer now, almost hesitant. She trailed off, her eyes flicking away for a brief moment before returning to Sarah's. And in that moment, Sarah knew. She wasn't sure how, but she knew. There was something between them, something that had been there for a while, simmering just beneath the surface, unspoken, but undeniably present. "I should go," Evelyn said suddenly, standing up from the desk. "It's late." "Yeah," Sarah said, though she didn't move. "It is." But neither of them made any effort to leave. Instead, Evelyn stood there, looking down at Sarah, her expression unreadable, but her eyes said everything. Sarah stood slowly, her heart pounding in her chest, and for a moment, she wasn't sure what she was going to do. This was her boss. This was Evelyn. But the way she was looking at her... "Evelyn," Sarah began, but she didn't know how to finish the sentence. She didn't even know what she was going to say, but it didn't matter, because Evelyn stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her hand reaching out to brush against Sarah's arm. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but it sent a jolt of electricity through Sarah's body, her breath catching in her throat as she looked up at Evelyn, wide-eyed. For a long moment they stood there, inches apart, the silence between them thick with tension, with anticipation, with something that felt far too dangerous to name. And then, without warning, Evelyn's hand moved to cup Sarah's cheek, her thumb brushing lightly against her skin as she leaned in, her lips barely brushing against Sarah's in the softest, most tentative kiss. Sarah's eyes fluttered closed, her heart racing as she kissed her back, her hands moving to rest on Evelyn's waist, pulling her closer. The kiss deepened slowly, and for a moment, it felt like the rest of the world had disappeared, leaving just the two of them, caught up in something they couldn't stop, couldn't control. When they finally pulled away, both of them were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other as they tried to catch their breath. "We shouldn't," Sarah whispered, though her hands were still on Evelyn's waist, her body still pressed against hers. "I know," Evelyn murmured, her voice just as breathless. "But I can't help it." Sarah's mind was racing, 1,000 thoughts running through her head all at once. This was her boss. This was wrong. But the way Evelyn was looking at her, the way she had kissed her, it felt so right. "I don't want to stop," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn's hand moved to the back of Sarah's neck, pulling her in for another kiss, this one deeper, more urgent. And just like that, all the reasons they shouldn't do this melted away, leaving only the undeniable pull between them, the desire that had been building for far too long. The kiss was slow at first, gentle, but it quickly became more intense, more demanding, as their hands began to roam, exploring each other with a newfound urgency. Sarah's fingers tangled in Evelyn's hair, pulling her closer as their bodies pressed together, the heat between them growing with every passing second. Evelyn's hands moved to Sarah's waist, pulling her against her, and Sarah could feel the strength in her boss's grip, the way her fingers dug into her skin just enough to make her gasp. They broke apart only when they were both breathless, their foreheads resting against each other once more as they tried to catch their breath. Evelyn looked down at Sarah, her eyes dark with desire, and for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped turning. "I've wanted this for so long," Evelyn admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat, Evelyn's words sinking in with a weight that left her momentarily speechless. For so long, Sarah had pushed her own feelings aside, dismissing every lingering glance, every stolen moment of warmth between them as a figment of her imagination. But now, standing here, the truth hanging between them like a confession, everything she'd tried to ignore came crashing down. She stepped back, just enough to look into Evelyn's eyes, searching for something. Reassurance, clarity, maybe even a sign that they could stop this before it went too far. But all she saw was the same need, the same pull, reflected back at her. "I didn't know," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought it was just me." Evelyn's gaze softened, her hand still resting lightly on Sarah's waist, a subtle reminder of the space they were no longer willing to keep between them. "It wasn't just you," she said softly. "It never was." A part of Sarah wanted to step away, to regain some semblance of control over the situation spiraling out of their hands. But another part, the part that had been silently yearning for this connection, couldn't resist the magnetic pull drawing her closer to Evelyn. And in that moment, it was impossible to care about the consequences. Evelyn's fingers traced along Sarah's jawline, slow and deliberate, sending shivers down her spine. "We should stop," Evelyn said, though her words lacked conviction, as if she were testing the idea aloud, already knowing neither of them would heed it. "I don't think I can," Sarah admitted, her voice trembling with the weight of her own conflicted emotions. In response, Evelyn's lips found Sarah's once more, soft but insistent, her kiss laced with an urgency that hadn't been there before. It was as if they both knew the lines had already been crossed, and there was no turning back now. Sarah's hands gripped Evelyn's hips, pulling her closer, feeling the heat between their bodies as the last remnants of restraint slipped away. Evelyn's hands moved up, sliding under Sarah's blouse, her fingers brushing against the soft skin of her back. The sensation made Sarah's heart race, her breath hitching as Evelyn's touch ignited something deep within her, a desire that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. Sarah's body reacted instinctively, pressing closer to Evelyn, feeling the rapid beat of her own heart mirrored in the thrum of Evelyn's pulse. For a fleeting moment, Sarah's mind whispered warnings. This was her boss. This was dangerous. This could ruin everything. But the thought was drowned out by the rush of sensation, the overwhelming need that coursed through her veins. Nothing else mattered in this moment but the feel of Evelyn's hands on her skin, the taste of her lips, the way their bodies seemed to fit together so perfectly, as if they'd been waiting for this moment all along. They stumbled backward, their lips never parting, until Sarah's back hit the desk with a soft thud. Evelyn's hands moved to the buttons of Sarah's blouse, her fingers deft as she began to undo them, one by one, her movements slow and deliberate, giving Sarah ample time to stop her, if she wanted to. But Sarah didn't stop her. Instead, she leaned into the moment, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she felt the fabric fall open, exposing her bare skin to the cool air of the office. Evelyn's hands roamed across her chest, her touch sending shivers of anticipation racing through Sarah's body. Sarah's head fell back, her eyes fluttering shut as Evelyn's lips found the sensitive skin of her neck, kissing her way down, leaving a trail of warmth in her wake. "Evelyn," Sarah whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. She wasn't even sure what she was asking for. More, maybe. Or maybe she was still trying to grasp the reality of what was happening between them, the way the walls they had carefully built around their feelings were crumbling, piece by piece. But Evelyn didn't respond with words. Instead, she kissed her way back up to Sarah's lips, capturing her in another deep, searing kiss that made Sarah's knees weak. Her hands moved with a practiced ease, slipping the blouse from Sarah's shoulders, letting it fall to the floor in a soft whisper of fabric. The cool air sent a jolt of awareness through Sarah's body, but Evelyn's warmth, the way she pulled her closer, chased away any lingering doubts. They moved together, a slow and steady rhythm building between them, their touches growing bolder, more insistent. Sarah's hands found the hem of Evelyn's dress, pushing it up as her fingers explored the soft curve of her waist, the smooth expanse of skin that beckoned to be touched. Evelyn moaned softly against her lips, the sound sending a wave of heat through Sarah's body, her own desire stoked higher by every breathless sound Evelyn made. They lost track of time, how long they stood there, wrapped in each other, their kisses growing hungrier, their touches more daring. The world outside the office ceased to exist, leaving only the two of them, tangled in this whirlwind of passion and emotion, their bodies moving as one. It wasn't just about desire, though that was certainly a part of it. It was about something deeper, something Sarah couldn't quite name. The connection between them felt electric, almost primal, as if they'd been denying this for so long that now, unleashed, it was impossible to contain. Evelyn pulled Sarah closer, her breath warm against her ear as she whispered, "I've wanted this for so long, Sarah." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her mind spinning as she processed Evelyn's words. The vulnerability in her voice, the raw honesty, made Sarah's chest tighten with something more than just physical attraction. It was the emotional weight of everything they'd been denying, everything they'd left unsaid, until now. "I have too," Sarah admitted, her voice barely audible, but the truth of it hung heavy in the air between them. She had wanted this, wanted Evelyn, for longer than she cared to admit, but it had always felt too complicated, too dangerous. Yet here they were, standing on the edge of something that could change everything, and Sarah wasn't sure she wanted to pull back. Evelyn kissed her again, deep and consuming, and Sarah let herself be swept away by the tide of emotion that threatened to drown her. She didn't care about the consequences. Not right now. All she cared about was this moment, the feel of Evelyn's body pressed against hers, the way their hands moved with a desperate urgency, as if they were trying to make up for all the time they had spent apart. Clothes were discarded in a flurry of movement, their breaths coming in shallow gasps as they pressed against each other, skin to skin, their bodies fitting together in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Every touch, every kiss sent a jolt of electricity through Sarah's veins, igniting a fire that she wasn't sure she could ever put out. They moved together with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each touch, each caress drawing them closer to the edge, their bodies trembling with the weight of their shared desire. The air between them was thick with tension, with the unspoken words that hung heavy in the silence. And yet, in that moment, words weren't needed. Their bodies spoke for them, every movement a testament to the connection that had always been there, waiting to be uncovered. As they reached the peak of their desire, their breaths mingling in the still air of the office, Sarah felt a surge of emotion wash over her. Desire, yes, but also something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. It was as if everything she had been holding back, all the unspoken feelings she had buried, were finally being released, and it left her trembling in Evelyn's arms. They came undone together, a shared moment of vulnerability and raw emotion that left them both breathless, their bodies tangled together as they rode out the wave of their desire. And when it was over, when the intensity of the moment began to fade, they lay there, wrapped in each other, their hearts still racing, their breaths still coming in shallow gasps. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them was filled with the weight of what had just happened, the undeniable shift in their relationship that couldn't be undone. Evelyn was the first to move, her fingers brushing lightly against Sarah's skin as she propped herself up on one elbow, her eyes searching Sarah's face. There was a softness in her gaze now, a tenderness that hadn't been there before. "Are you okay?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she were afraid of breaking the fragile peace that had settled over them. Sarah nodded, though her mind was still reeling, her body still humming with the aftershocks of their shared passion. "I'm okay," she whispered, her voice steady, though her heart felt anything but. Evelyn leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to Sarah's forehead, her touch gentle, almost reverent. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she admitted, her voice laced with guilt, "but I don't regret it." Sarah looked up at her, the weight of her own emotions crashing down around her like a wave. She didn't regret it either, but that didn't make it any less complicated. "I don't regret it," Sarah said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "but I don't know where we go from here."